Good morning everyone and happy Tuesday. I'm here today to talk about Canine Agility, the sport, what it is, how it works, the different obstacles, and how it can help your dog. So essentially, I'm surprised by how many people don't actually know what it is. Agility is basically an obstacle course set up for dogs. The combination of intellectual stamina and physical stamina can tire the dog out quite a bit, but it's a really good training exercise. If you have any of the obstacles, a lot of them can be made quite easily for smaller dogs. If you have bigger dogs, you can buy the obstacles if you have a backyard. If not, you can go to a place that has the equipment already and just rent time there. I highly recommend it, especially if you have hyper dogs, dogs that are destructive chewers. A lot of times they just need more exercise and stimulation. Any dog that exhausts you or you feel like isn't getting enough exercise or stimulation, it's a really good way to get both types of stimulation at the same time, as well as strengthening the bond you have with them. So that's how it works. If you're doing it at a higher level, they are graded on time and accuracy. And I'm going to go through what faults are, how that works, but essentially the faster they can complete it, the more likely they are to win. However, you can't touch the dog while you're doing it. You can use your voice, you can use movements of your body to direct them in certain ways, and you can use hand signals, but that's it. You're not allowed to touch them or tell them, you are allowed to tell them things, let's be real, but teaching them the words for the obstacles sometimes helps because then they can recognize the difference. When you do a professional level one, there are course maps available so they can plan it out, and you do get a walkthrough when you first go in at most levels because it allows you to practice the turns and where your dog might get distracted. So there's quite a few different obstacles. I thought I'd go through those first. One of the popular ones is called an Aframe. It looks like this. The dog goes up one side and down the other side. Typically it's 5 to 6 feet high. There are what are called contact zones at the bottom. So there's about a foot. Usually it's painted a different color. They do have grips on them. When the one I practiced with, the whole thing was blue and the contact zones were yellow. The dog gets a penalty if they don't touch the contact zone when they go onto the obstacle. So for example, if they just jump over it and keep going, they have to have at least 1 foot on it when they enter and 1 foot when they get off. So that's what a contact zone is. The dog walk is similar to the A-frame, but there's a plank connecting the two pieces. So there's one that goes up with a contact zone, one that goes across, and one that goes down the other side. Usually this one's pretty easy for most of them, but sometimes they go really fast and fall off or something like that. They are typically 4 feet high. There's also a seesaw, which most of you know what that is. They get on one end, go to the middle, it tilts, and they get off. They are specifically made off balance so that it's always the same end that goes down, because otherwise the dogs would end up going backwards. This one is difficult for a lot of dogs because they don't like the movement or the noise when they get off. I know Kaya definitely didn't. So they train it first with tables under each end and then slowly remove them so the difference between the height is higher each time. There's what's called a crossover, and I haven't actually seen one of these. It's basically a platform with a bunch of different walks coming off of it, and the dogs have to go up a specific walk and down a specific walk. So the trainer has to be able to direct the dog to the correct plank to walk down, or they get a penalty. There's tunnels, which most of you guys know about. Typically they're 10 to 20 feet long. Usually they're straight, but a lot of times they're used in corners. So for example, the dog goes in one and comes out this way instead. Kaya really liked the tunnels when we were doing it with her. I do have a video on my Instagram if you want to see what that looks like. We are in a barn and it is cold, but she does quite well on a lot of these. There's also the collapse tunnel, which is basically the frame of the tunnel and then plastic chute. It was suspended in 2016 due to injury, so they don't actually use it anymore. The most popular obstacle is obviously jumps. There are a whole bunch of different kinds. For example, there's the winged ones, which have stands on both ends, so it kind of directs the dog towards the jump. There's double and triple jumps, where there's one jump and then another one slightly higher, so the dog knows which direction to go. There's also triple or long jumps, where there's a plank in the middle and the dog has to jump all the way over without making contact with the plank, which I also haven't seen, but I've heard interesting things about. The tired jump is interesting for some. It's usually really easy for sporting dogs. Essentially, it's a frame and there's a tire suspended in the middle. The dog has to jump through the tire. A lot of dogs hesitate at first, so the idea is to lead them up to it, toss the treat through the tire, and they will go. Which, once they get it the first couple times, it's pretty easy. There's also what's called a pause table. Now, essentially, if they're running really fast, they have to stop, get on the table, stop, and wait a couple seconds, and then they get to keep going, just to show that they have the mental capacity to switch between movement and rest. And the most complicated, I would say, is weave pulls, because the dog has to go in with the first one on a specific side of its body, and they have to hit every single weave pull and then get out, which training them to do that is quite difficult. So the way that we learned it is you separate half and half, and they do the first half of the weave pulls, which is maybe 3 or 4, and then you reward them. And then you slowly bring the two halves closer together, and then you direct them from the first half to the second half, and then when they get that, you keep moving them closer together until they're all in a line. But getting the dogs to do them really fast is challenging, so that takes a lot of practice. Typically in professional contests, it's judged by faults, and these include everything from time faults. So if there's a set time you're supposed to beat and you don't beat it, that's obviously a time fault. If you knock down an obstacle, obviously this is more common for jumps. If bigger dogs, sometimes they knock down bigger things. If they run past an obstacle, so they're supposed to be in a certain sequence, and they miss it. If they don't touch the contact zone, that's a fault, and it is on both ends of a lot of obstacles. The weave pull fault, if they go in the wrong way, or they miss some pulls, or they quit halfway. If they refuse a jump or an obstacle, that's a fault. Or if the handler touches the dog, that's also a fault. There's obviously extra ones for, hi Kai, extra ones for, sorry, I'm just gonna close the door. Hello, honey. There we go. Hi. Extra ones for things like the dog biting somebody, the dog taking off, or leaving the ring. Those all count as faults. There's a few different types of competition. The first is the standard kind, where they do all the obstacles. It's usually about 12 to 15, and that's that. And the best time with the least faults wins. There's just strictly jumping, which usually the jumps are complicated and more advanced. There's strictly speed tests, so whoever completes it the quickest wins. There's relay, where you can do it on teams, so one dog does 5 obstacles and a second dog does the rest. There's a time to beat, which is quite common because usually it's about, this one dog goes and gets this time, then you have to beat that time or you lose. Power and speed is a 2-step one, so the first one is about getting all the obstacles correctly, and the second part is about doing it the quickest. So whoever gets the highest comparatively between the two, they win. Typically with agility, it is a high contact sport for dogs, and just like things like dock diving, there are injuries that happen. So typically with agility, it's strains, sprains, bruises. Sometimes they break a leg or something, but it's not common unless they hit a solid obstacle, something like an Aframe or a dog walk from the side. Sometimes they fall off obstacles if they're going too fast, but it does happen. typically, I have worked on dogs that have sports injuries, so it is really important to take care of your dog because they are the equipment, but they're also the player. So you have to look after them if you're putting them in competitive sports. Even if you're doing it for fun, I've seen little dogs, going up on the A-frame, and the A-frame's 6 feet high, and the dog's probably, this big. So you do have to be careful when you're playing, but if you're doing it for fun, don't worry too much about, how fast you're going or all of those things, but be careful because your dog is more important than any prize you could win. So just take it easy, have fun, and if your dog does get injured or you want to talk about session options for things like CCL tears, if they landed funny and they're sore, all things like that, feel free to send me a message. I do work on animals that are injured quite a lot, many post-surgery if they've had more serious injuries. But that is the basis of agility. If you have any questions or want me to talk about any other animal sports like dock diving or for horses, carriage pulling, show jumping, dressage, anything like that, feel free to send me a message. I always love to educate. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and I will see you next Tuesday. Kai wants to go out again. See you later.